Welcome to the massive open online course on emergence of early historic India. Today I will be talking about the historical research of numismatic studies, particularly with special emphasis on the Bactrian Greeks and the Indo-Greeks. In the domain of numismatic research, the Greco-Bactrians and the Indo-Greeks are foremost important because of the fact that we do not have much source on them. So their history depends much more on their coins. Moreover, their coins actually gave us some interesting highlights in the sense that the coins that were being used in the past did not have legends, nor they were struck in the die struck method. But here we have die struck method and legends, and moreover we have depiction of portraits. So portraiture was very important for the Indo-Greek and the Greco-Bactrian coins. We shall call it Bactro-Indo-Greeks following Olivier Guillaume to understand the nature of these coins. The discovery of these coins were very important for us because it was mainly initially an antiquarian interest, and lots of coins of the Greek rulers were found unearthed from different sites. Now when we look at the history of the coinages, we find that at least 40 of the rulers were known from coins, whereas literature gives us only 8 or 9 names. Now it was Charles Mason who initially was a collector who, after going through his excavations on the coins, actually gave us an account of the different coins that were being found in the form of a catalogue. Following Mason, we find that James Prinsep also got the first Burns collection in the Asiatic Society of Bengal, and he started working on those coins. But more or less it was a kind of a catalogue. The first change that we find in the writing or of the history of this coinage comes with Alexander Cunningham. Alexander Cunningham, following Prinsep, actually gave us a catalogue of the coins, but there were some historical understanding also in his interpretations. Therefore, when he writes about the successors of the Greeks in the East, we have a detailed account of the coin types as well as the history of these rulers. Now, this phase of writing catalogues was followed by a different phase where we have an historical account by two persons. One was W. Turn, whose book on the Greeks and Bactria in India created flutter in the academic circle because of the immense amount of information that we got from his writings. Moreover, his approach was that it was an Hellenic extension of the kings in India. But as if to contradict Turn, we have the presence of A.K. Narayan, who wrote an interesting book on the Indo-Greeks in India, and he actually challenged Turn's idea of this Hellenic origin of the Greeks, and he said that they came, they saw, but India conquered. The divergence of approach between Turn and A.K. Narayan can be seen in the way they were looking at the provenances. For example, Turn was using the find spots of the coins, but he believed that find spots of the coins cannot give you a total history. On the other hand, A.K. Narayan looked at the find spots as a very important source of history, and therefore he could understand that through these coins, the findings of these coins, we can see the area through which these kingdoms were actually expanded and the kings ruled. In between A.K. Narayan and Turn's idea of writing history of the Greco-Bactrians and the Indo-Greeks, we have 3 catalogues which were being written by Gardner, Vincent Smith, and then by R.B. Whitehead. P. Gardner's catalogue was on the coins of the British Museum, Vincent Smith's catalogues were on the coins of the Indian Museum, and R.B. Whitehead wrote on the coins of the Lahore Museum presently in Pakistan. Now, this stage of writing catalogues was followed by 2 historians who had written the catalogues of the coins, but in a slightly different way. These were Lahiri and Mechiner. Now, A. Lahiri in 1965 wrote his book called The Corpus of Indo-Greek Coins. This book is also very important for us because it is not a catalogue of only one museum. He could collect and study those coins in different museums and then actually prepare a catalogue of all the coins known to him. On the other hand, Michener tried to find out the coins from different private collectors, and so we get, if we study these coins together, A.N. Lahiri's coins and Michener's coins, then we can find that they were actually juxtaposed and we can holistically have a holistic understanding of those coins of the Greco-Bactrians and the Indo-Greeks. But the actual change in the attitude or in the approach of looking at these coins came with the writings of Olivier Guillaume. Olivier Guillaume, in his immensely important work on analysis of these coins, he actually showed that how the archaeologists and the historians interpret these coins, and when a numismatist is reading the coins, what was the important areas where the thrust was and how the historians actually interpreted the work of the numismatists. So therefore, instead of the numismatics only being read by the numismatists, or instead of looking of the historians looking at coins, numismatic studies also engaged in the archaeological domain. Following Guillaume, we find that another person became very important for our study, and he was Osman Bapiraci. Osman Bapiraci's study was not concerned only with chronology, and I have to mention that chronology was always a big problem for the Bactrian Greeks and the Indo-Greek coins, because after the famous 4 or 5 rulers, we find a spate of different rulers, and the coins of these rulers were not dated, and we do not have any other sources. So naturally it was very difficult to place the coins one after, or place the rulers one after another. But for Osman Bapiraci, his study on the monograms of these rulers and the die studies helped a lot in the progress of or understanding of numismatic researches, particularly of the Greco-Bactrian and Indo-Greek coins. Osman Bapiraci tried to show that these monograms actually were given by the mint masters, and so it showed the location of the coins and how different monograms actually could be understood to see the variety of the different kinds of mints that we can find in the Indo-Greek domain. Therefore, if we look as a whole the different works of the Indo-Greek on the Indo-Greek coins, we find that it is more a transition from catalogue to analytical frameworks, and therefore the focus of the study shifted only from catalogue writing to much more historical understanding. But one lacuna still remains, and that is the in the domain of economic history, numismatic studies have not made so much of an inroad as it should have been. From Greco-Bactrian numismatics, we will now move on to a personality whose name is Sir Aurel Stein, and whose contribution to the history and archaeology of Central Asia and particularly the Silk Road is indisputable. Aurel Stein was a British-Hungarian archaeologist, and his fascination for the Silk Road began with his studies on the writings of Xuanzang. He was deeply interested in Oriental studies, and he always wanted to look at the lives and the history of the people of Central Asia and China. He was also part of the Calcutta intellectual circle at that point of time in the early 20th century. Now, Aurel Stein's studies on Central Asia began with his first different kinds of expeditions which he undertook. We are aware of his 3 expeditions. The results of his first expedition was known as Ancient Khotan. Then comes the famous book called Serindia, and he collected all his experiences in a 3rd book which was known as On Central Asian Tracts. It's a vivid description of archaeology, geography, and the life of the people that actually lived in the various oases and other places of Central Asia. It is very interesting to note that Sir Orelstein loved to be into these desert tracts, and he always thought that there was some kind of connection with India and which he was trying to locate. Moreover, when he looked at the places, particularly the site of Nia, he was fascinated. Nia and Miran was very important sites in Chinese Central Asia, and the palace of Nia and Miran, it was like he always said that it is my little Pompeii. The seal of Athena, which was found from Nia excavations, all his publications carried an imprint of that seal. He studied Nia for understanding the lives of the people and Miran for understanding how the people looked like. From these studies, we get a vivid picture of the everyday life of the people of Central Asia. Another very important discovery of his was the Dunhuang caves. These caves were located in the route of the Great Silk Road, and it was hidden treasure. Orelstein could locate the places, and when he could find them, he collected more than 50,000 manuscripts. Dunhuang paintings are well known, and it is through Orelstein that the whole Dunhuang caves became accessible to us. Another important discovery of Sir Orelstein were unearthing the Sogdian merchants' letters in Central Asia. These Sogdian merchants were very important merchant groups who travelled from the Mediterranean region to the parts of different areas of Central Asia and were important players in the trade network of China and Rome. So, not much was known about them, but the discovery of these letters gave us some understanding of the different kinds of commodity that were being transferred, because we all know that though the name of the route is called Silk Road, silk was not the only commodity that were being carried on. So, interestingly, in these letters which were written in Sogdian, we find that there is reference even to pepper, which is not a commodity of Central Asia. So, which shows that pepper perhaps came from the Malabar region in India and was taken by the Sogdian merchants, who had very important role to play in the Indian context and the relationship between the different merchants of Central Asia and South Asia. Now, from Orelstein, we can move further to the history of the Kushanas in particular, and we find that in the Indian context, we have to remember a famous historian, Professor B.N. Mukherjee from the University of Calcutta. He was the Carmichael Professor of the University of Calcutta and the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture. His stupendous work on the Kushanas changed the understanding of Kushana history in South Asia. The salience of B.N. Mukherjee's work is that he brought in for the first time in the writings of the Indian historians the importance of Central Asia in understanding Kushana, and particularly he talked about the role of Bactria in Kushana history. Though he did not belittle the importance of North India, but Bactria was an important zone from where the Kushanas moved further east. We know that Kushanas were the Yuezhi tribes who came to the lower Bactria, then they moved further east, crossing the Hindu Kush, came to the lower Indus country, and B.N. Mukherjee shows for the first time the economic factors that were responsible for the plunge of the Kushanas to the heartland of the Indian subcontinent. His work provides a great kind of a window for understanding the character of the Kushana rulers, how a nomadic group converted into a sedentary civilizational group has been found and shown by B.N. Mukherjee's work. His study on the Kushana coins gives us further understanding of the eclectic character of the Kushana Empire. he showed in his articles on the deities on the Kushana coins that how different deities belonging to different regions of the Kushan Empire actually were represented in the coins of the rulers like Kanishka and Huvishka and of course others. These deities actually represent power and shows that this representation of the deities were not random choice, but it was a legitimate policy of the Kushan rulers to depict the deities who were directly linked with the Kushan rule. And herein we can bring in the importance of the Rabatak inscription. The discovery of the Rabatak inscription in the mid 1990s shows that Kushan history could actually be studied from a different perspective. So this inscription was reread by Professor B.N. Mukherjee after Nicholas Silps-Williams and Joe Cribb, and his understanding of the Rabatak inscription suggests that how the Kushana rulers were actually instrumental in building up the cult of empire and emperor. In the Rabatak inscription, we find the reference of dynastic sanctuaries. Now these dynastic sanctuaries were very important for the Kushan rule because we have reference to dynastic sanctuaries in Surkotal and other places. Now B.N. Mukherjee's study shows that the Kushana rulers were perhaps using the dynastic sanctuaries to understand to build up the cult of the emperor, because here not only the dead kings were being worshipped, but even from the Rabatak inscription we learn that Kanishka himself calls himself Bago and he was also worshipped. These dynastic sanctuaries were known as Bagolaggo or Bagolango, and therefore it was compared to Devakula of the Mathura or the Mat inscription written in the time of Huvishka. So the people were venerating not only the deities that were being housed in the sanctuaries on the Devakulas or Bagolangos, but they were venerating the ruler also. B.N. Mukherjee showed that this is perhaps necessary because the vast Kushan empire had to be ruled by some political processes, and this process could be the fact that the cult of the empire and emperor could act as a cementing factor to bind the big Kushan empire. Now when we look at the cult of the empire, we find that in the Kushana coins some deities were being introduced. For example, Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the deity of the royal glory, and so it is an abstract deity and which was used by Huvishka and Kanishka both. So Pharaoh represented the empire. So in this way, B.N. Mukherjee sought to understand the nature of Kushan polity, which was largely guided by the cult of the empire and emperor. Another very interesting feature of his study is that he took interest in the art of coins, and he could understand from this the beautiful representations on the coins that the use of the dies were very important for proper representation of the divinities that were being depicted in the coins. So numismatic art as a discipline was the brainchild of B.N. Mukherjee, and for this he first took into account the coins of the Kushanas, where we have beautiful representations of deities like Nana, Oesho, Ardoksho and others. So thus when we look at the Kushana studies in the Indian context, we cannot forget the contribution of Professor B.N. Mukherjee, whose books like Rise and Fall of the Kushana Empire, then we have India in Central Asia and Kushana Studies New Perspectives, which opened a window for understanding the Kushana rule. Thus, so far today we have discussed the numismatic researches on the Bactrian and Indo-Greek coins, the transition from catalogues to archaeological or analytical frameworks. Then we have talked about Orelstein's contribution, and it is also important to mention here that the discovery of the Bauer manuscript in Kucha region was also instrumental in his desire for looking for Khotan. From Orelstein, we come to the present day historian, Professor B.N. Mukherjee, and there we found that his knowledge of different languages actually helped him in his studies on the Kushanas. B.N. Mukherjee's contribution to Kushan history largely rests on his understanding of the Kushanas from the Rabatak inscription and the coins, where he showed that the installation of image and then worship of these images, that is the deities and the rulers, by the common people, and the representation of different gods and goddesses which had actually displayed power, could show that there was a cult of the empire and the emperor in the Kushan political structure, which helped the Kushanas to bind the large amount of area which was under their control.